Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do a two-tone emboss resist technique with stencils, but you're also going to need some pigment inks. I'm using the Versifying Clear inks because they're a pigment ink and they stay wet for a really long time, so they're perfect to use for this technique. I'm going to be using the Chianti. Thank you for the comments that told me how to say that the last time. And also the Twilight ink. These are two gorgeous colors. So I'm just going to play around with them today. Now for my stencil, I'm going to be using the Leaf Collection stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. I'm using that center leaf right there that has the ink already around it. You can tell I've been playing around with this technique already. And I'm going to go ahead and place that down on an A2, not A2, it's 4 inches by 5 1/4 inch, so slightly smaller than an A2 white cardstock panel. Now I like to go ahead and line my stencil up, make sure my image is nice and centered, and then I put a piece of tape right there on the front. That way I can flip it over. I don't have to worry about messing with it once it's flipped over. I know everything's stayed in place. Tape it from the back, flip it back over, and take that tape off on the front. That way the entire panel is nice and centered. I don't have to worry about me slightly shifting it when I flip it or anything like that. Now, I am a messy crafter, so I know I get a little crazy when I start inking. I'm going to just very quickly save myself a lot of time and trouble by masking off any of those areas around my little leaf that I could get some ink into on the card. That way, I don't have to go back and fix that later on. So I just use a little bit of masking tape and tape off all those sections. Now to get my ink through the stencil today, I'm going to go ahead and just use a makeup sponge. This works amazing just to get some ink through that stencil, and you can kind of manipulate these, bend them and twist them and scrunch them down every which way to really get into all those little cracks and crevices, those little borders and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and just dip my sponge, tap it into the ink pad, and then tap it onto the leaf stencil. I'm not dragging or anything. I'm just very quickly tapping the ink onto the paper. Now again, this is a pretty detailed stencil, so I'm going to be kind of angling my makeup brush every which way and also scrunching it down to really get into those tight spaces. You want to make sure that you're getting not only from the bottom of the stencil the way you're looking, but you also need to make sure you're getting from the top as well. So if you see any white spaces, just kind of twist your stencil, maybe angle it a different way. That way you can fill in all those little spaces. Now, as I'm doing this, you can see that I've got this really rich purpley pink color going on my stencil. The great thing about pigment inks, what you see on that is what you get. So pigment inks sit on top of the paper. These are going to stay wet for a really long time, which is very beneficial for our next step, which we're going to heat emboss. I very quickly, just carefully to remove that stencil. I wanted to make sure that I didn't get any ink anywhere else on the panel, and then I got my stuff ready to go. I'm going to be using clear embossing powder today, and again, these stay wet for a really long time, so you can kind of get your area set up and ready to go. I'm pouring over a coffee filter because it's easy to clean up, but also because I'm going to double heat emboss this. You don't have to do that. However, I like the look of it a little bit better. I think it gives it a smoother finish, and also it raises it up a little bit more. I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. Once I have that first layer of embossing on, I cleaned up my area. Again, you don't have to worry about time at this point because that ink stays wet for so long. I'm going to go ahead and bring out my heat gun. I have let it heat up for about 30 seconds, and then I just bring it over and start heat embossing. At this point, you do not want to completely heat set if you're going to go for that second embossing layer. You just want to get the powder melted and then move on to your next section. If you're doing this only one layer of embossing, by all means heat set it completely. However, because I'm going to move on and do a second layer, I'm going to go ahead and let this cool down for just a few seconds. Let everything kind of cool off so I don't burn anything. Then I bring my heat gun back in. I'm going to heat this up a second time. And I want to move quickly here because this powder does not stay wet for a long time. Then very quickly I'm going to bring in my clear embossing powder and dump that over the still hot and melted embossing powder that's already been melted. It's going to skip a few places, that's okay. I'll come back in, and the places that I missed, I'll just go ahead and heat up again very quickly. Again, you don't want to stay too long on these areas because you will burn your embossing powder or your paper. So just keep moving that heat gun around. Then I can very quickly dump on some more embossing powder. I also missed the top part of this, so again, just come back in, heat it up very quickly, and dump on some more embossing powder. That way I get this second layer of embossing. I didn't have to go back in with any more ink, line up a stencil. If you get any stray powders, use a dry brush to quickly flick them off, and then you can come back in and go ahead and heat set this for the second time. You could go in for a third layer if you wanted to. That would be gorgeous. I'm going to stop at 2 though. I felt like that was a good enough smoothness, and I got a nice raised area with this. Here's a closer look at that. You can see just how smooth of a finish you do get just by adding that second layer of embossing powder, and it's super easy and doesn't take a whole lot of time. You do want to give it a little bit of time to cool because you've got that second layer of melted plastic basically on your card, so you don't want to burn your fingers. But then once you give it time to cool, it's time to start ink blending. Now the great thing about these pigment inks is, again, they sit on top of the paper, so they blend beautifully. I want a really nice soft look here, so I grabbed out my clarity brush. This is the second to largest size, and I just dip it in my ink pad. Give it a few taps, and then I tap off the excess ink onto a scrap piece of paper. Then I start in the center of my leaf and just start blending outwards. Now I want to get a nice pigmented color just around the leaf, and then once I get that exactly where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and just use the ink that's left over on the brush, not dip it in any more times to the ink pad, and just start blending out those edges and really get them kind of blended off into nothing essentially. So you can see I'm going to dip one more time here into my ink pad, and then from there on out I'm going to use just the ink that's left over on my brush and the ink that's sitting on top of the paper to really move those around and blend those out and soften up those edges. Again, you don't have to worry about time with this. You've got quite a bit of play time because the pigment inks sit on top of the paper and they don't dry for a long time. So you can just keep blending and blending and blending and blending until you're really happy with the edges. Again, I wanted this pretty soft, so I'm just going to keep blending for a little bit of time. Now again, you want to make sure that whenever you're doing your heat embossing, you did clean up all those little stray flecks of powder, because anywhere those might have stuck down, you'd have a nice white spot right in your ink blending. Now once I was done with the ink blending, I got a little bit of a buildup of ink on top of my embossing. You're going to get that anytime you do ink blending. So just take a dry cloth and buff right over the top of that. That's going to remove all that extra ink that's sitting on top of there. It's going to give you that nice shine back to your embossing. And there's a closer look at it all blended together. Now I wanted to add just a little something extra to this, a little bit of shine, a little bit more shine, I guess I could say. So I grabbed out the fireworks spray. I have the rich cocoa here. You want to give these a good shake. And then I just like to take the nozzle out and use the end of it to flick on some little dots of color. Now this is going to go on and it's going to be a little bit brown. However, when this dries, it's got such a gorgeous shine to it. It's really pretty. I'll give you a nice close-up shot. I like to do just a bunch of splatters, and again, if any of this gets on the embossing, you can take a dry cloth once it's dry and just quickly buff that away, or just kind of tap it away. That way you don't have any of those flecks on your embossing. There you can see that nice shine that you get, and you also get a nice pigmented color. Now for my sentiment, I wanted to keep it nice and simple, but I also wanted you to be able to see it and kind of pick it out from that kind of busy background now. So I went ahead and took a thanks die, and I die cut it about 5 times from heavyweight brown cardstock. If you're using a lighter weight, you might want to die cut it more times, or just kind of play around. 5 was kind of the perfect number for me. I'm using just a glue to very quickly brush that on and then layer these up and create that chipboard effect. I'm pretty messy on the first 4 layers. However, on that last layer, I like to keep it nice and clean. So I grabbed out my Zig glue pen, put a nice layer of ink all over that die cut, and then I'll go ahead and layer that final thanks on top. That way I don't have any funny like little glue threads or anything like that. They look like little spider webs essentially all over my Thanks die. The first 4 layers I'm messy on, the last one I do take my time on. Then, once I have that done, I'm going to sit that off to the side with an acrylic block on top of it to give it some nice pressure and allow all those layers to dry and kind of fuse together. There's a closer look at it all put together. You get that nice chipboard effect, but you can see I've still got it sitting off to the side to dry. I've got my panel ready to be mounted here, so I'm going to go ahead and mat this with the same brown cardstock that I used for my Thanks die. Now, as I was going through the Save the Crafty YouTuber hop, I picked up some really great tips. One of them was from Mary Polanco. She suggested that when you do your mats, go ahead and cut out the center of your mat. That way you don't use as much cardstock. You're not going to see the center of it anyway, so why not just cut it out? Save that, use it for more die cutting, use it for a smaller mat, whatever you want to use it for, but that way you're not wasting a bunch of cardstock. So I wanted to throw that in here. I didn't do it here, I completely forgot about it. However, I love the suggestion and it's such a smart and economical idea here. So for my card, I'm going to go ahead and just take an A2 sized side folding card base from white cardstock. I've added a little bit of dimensional adhesive onto the back of my brown panel. Then I'll just pop that up right in the center of my card base. I then am going to go ahead and take that Thanks die cut. Again, I want this to have a really nice finish to it, so I'm using that Zig glue pen so it's not very messy. Putting a layer of glue all over the back of that, and then I'll place that right down on the bottom of the panel. I didn't want to place it right in the center of the leaf. Thought that was a little bit too much, so I just glued it right there on the bottom where I've got quite a bit of white space. Again, I'm going to place an acrylic block on top of that just to give it that nice pressure. Hold everything in place so it's not sliding around, and let that dry so I know it's nice and secure when I send it through the mail. Now that pretty much finishes off the outside of the card. I did do the inside as well. I grabbed out those same Chianti and Twilight ink pads that I used on the front. I grabbed that leaf stencil again, stenciled off to the right hand side there, then used a For Everything stamp to finish off the sentiment on the inside with Twilight ink. You can see those inks not only give you a nice crisp, clean image when you stencil with them, but you also get that nice crisp, clean sentiment on the inside as well. That is going to do it for me today. Here is one final look at the card. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, supplies that I used are going to be listed in the description box below. You can find some more videos from me over on the left side of your screen. You can also subscribe to my channel over there as well. All of my social medias are down in the description box if you want to hop on over there as well. Thanks for watching and happy crafting.